Welcome to the Navik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Navik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.navik.co. This episode is brought to you by our partners at GameSight. GameSight provides full-service campaign management, taking charge of consulting, influencer discovery, relationship management, billing, and reporting, leaving you free to focus on your core business. With their measurement platform and creator-focused programs, GameSight helps brands grow, increase revenue, and ensure player satisfaction worldwide. And since the company draws from almost a decade of battle-tested experience, including with notable customers like Bungie, Capcom, Ubisoft, and hundreds more, GameSight's attribution platform meets the unique needs of PC, console, and Web3 games. Notably, GameSight brings display, social, influencer, and affiliate marketing into one dashboard for easy comparison. Marketing attribution for PC and console games is complicated, but whether your game is free to play, premium, or supported by DLCs, GameSight has you covered. To learn more about how GameSight has served other games teams and how it can help yours, simply visit gamesight.io or check out the link in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Navik Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Niko Vuori. Today, we are exploring the Bitcoin Lightning Network and what it might mean for Web3 gaming. As most of our listeners will know, just about all games that currently integrate some kind of blockchain technologies are either on Ethereum, most likely via a layer 2 solution, such as Polygon or Immutable X, or they're building on a more scalable but less decentralized layer 1 chain, such as Solana or Binance Smart Chain. But Bitcoin, the granddaddy of blockchains, has not attracted much attention from game developers, and for some very good reasons, but mainly because on-chain transaction on Bitcoin is very, very, very slow. And while Bitcoin was probably never envisioned by its original creator, Satoshi, as a gaming platform, that does not mean that game developers couldn't or shouldn't build on Bitcoin or integrate Bitcoin in some way, shape, or form, especially given how important Bitcoin is to the overall crypto market share and mind share. But in order to make any headway on Bitcoin, if you want any kind of scalability, a layer 2 solution is required, just like on Ethereum. And so this is where the Bitcoin Lightning Network comes in. I am not technical, so I'm going to be very careful about how I describe what the Bitcoin Lightning Network does. But my understanding, and our guest today is going to go a little bit deeper on this, is that it was originally conceived of in 2015. And the Lightning Network is designed to overcome the scalability issues inherent with Bitcoin by opening up a series of bidirectional payment channels without delegating custody of funds. And that's as technical as I'm going to go. And you as a developer, you're saying, hey, fantastic, but what does that mean for me? As a game developer, can I really build scalable, accessible, mass market games on Bitcoin? And to answer that question, and to dig deeper into what the Lightning Network does and is, and what it means for game developers, we have a great guest on the pod today. He is Ben Cousens. He is the Chief Strategy Officer at Zebedee, which is building payment processing technology on top of Bitcoin using the Lightning Network. And Zebedee's stated target customer is the gaming industry. And so he is perfectly positioned to take us on a journey into the bowels of Bitcoin and what it might offer for game devs. Ben, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Niko. I'm looking forward to taking us into the bowels of Bitcoin, as you put it.
Fantastic. And as a kind of full disclosure note here, Zebedee is also a Navik sponsor, but I can assure you that us podcast hosts have complete editorial independence and that the Lightning Network is actually a topic I've been wanting to cover for a while anyway. So this is a happy coincidence that Ben and Zebedee are part of the Navik ecosystem as well. So with that intro out of the way, let's get right into it. And I always like to start with this question, especially with folks who've got a long and storied career, such as our guest today. What was your journey, Ben, into Web3, and specifically with this focus on gaming in Web3?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think a lot of the time I introduce myself is usually around the gaming side, but I'll focus on the crypto side given the subject matter. And I came in. I'm crypto class of 2015. I was introduced to. I was first introduced to Bitcoin by an Argentinian friend of mine who was using it to send money home, and I was open-minded enough to try it, is the way I'd describe it. And I was a music pirate in my teens, is to disclaim things lightly. When I saw the public key encryption, the way that Bitcoin transactions worked, I had a bit of an aha moment, I would describe it as. And I was really quite open to the idea of a digital form of money. At the time, I was very, very skeptical, but I was open to the concept that this could come into existence. It wasn't it wasn't inherently a pyramid scheme or anything like that. I could understand that cryptographically this might work. I think Ethereum was around a year old at that point, and I started playing around in that ecosystem as well. This is, back when I think it was a 1 minute block time ETH had back then, and if it still does, it betrays my lack of awareness now. But I remember using it then, and it was just much faster and much cheaper, and that was the kind of way that Ethereum came out. I moved from there into dabbling in CryptoKitties, diving into Solana. I was a very early participant in Steemit as well, which is like the first high-profile proof of stake failure, I think. But then and then it sort of all went full circle when Lightning came out, and I found the instantaneity of Bitcoin transactions too alluring. So I kind of refocused on that, and that's where I found myself playing ever since. I've been really blown away by the fact that we can now send money instantly online, peer to peer, with no financial intermediary.
I love that, and most of our focus on this podcast, this segment of the podcast, has generally been on Ethereum, or one of the other layer ones like Solana, for example, which is where Blockstars is building. We're building our product. So it's actually really refreshing and exciting to have somebody from the Bitcoin ecosystem to come on the show and talk about this, because I don't think it gets enough attention, and especially doesn't get a lot of attention from the gaming community. And so that's my next question on your background. How did why gaming and Bitcoin, right? Like, how did you find that intersection? Why are you playing around in that intersection at Zebedee?
Yeah, so then thanks for asking, because that's actually where I come from. I'm originally from the gaming world. My family worked in video games. I began my first ever job was doing QA for a video games company in Portsmouth in the UK when I was about 16 or so. And I worked in games all the way through into my early to mid 20s. And then I jumped over into investment banking for the sin of it. But I was over there and I was still working on games. I was doing mergers and acquisitions and capital raising for video games companies. So I had this, for me, it was very much a bifurcated life where I was working in and around the games industry, but then in my spare time, really devoting myself to digging into crypto and Bitcoin and that whole ecosystem and trying to understand it. And it was very fortuitous that I found myself in around 2018 or so in a position to invest in gaming startups. I was working for a VC fund called Lakestar, and I was leading a seed investment strategy for games. And just as the Web3 kind of thing blew up, and it was there that I encountered sort of all these different approaches to games plus the blockchain. And I think in many cases, cynicism and all of the market stories aside, there's a there. There is something that is tapping into. There is something in the collection of digital assets and the use of digital money in interactive entertainment spaces that really does tap into something gamers have been looking for. I think that's my fundamental view. There's a ton of noise around that signal, and everyone's trying to sort of go after a similar or same goal. But I do think in a world where, like a game, where the money itself is fantastical, the economy is something sort of somewhat managed or illusory, it makes sense to use a digital form of value to power that economy. And I think that's where the market heated up. And I found myself most interested in the Lightning camp, as I said. But yeah, I really came at this through when it came to commercially applying crypto to my life, gaming was really the only avenue I had in front of me. And it was very lucky that the games industry looked at Web3 seriously, in the last 2 to 3 years.
Obviously, I was very careful with my wording. I don't want to get myself into trouble trying to describe something that I don't necessarily fully understand myself. But my notion, and probably most of our listeners or many of our listeners' notion of what the Lightning Network is it's essentially a layer 2 for Bitcoin, right? That's the way to think about it. But let's go a level deeper. What is the Bitcoin Lightning Network? How does it work? Why is it needed? What does it do?
I'll do my best here. So I mean, I think if you cast, because there has been a lot of focus on the scalability of all kinds of blockchains, and it's interesting to me how Bitcoin has really been a very small part of that, despite being the lion's share of market cap and volume of the ecosystem. And I think I increasingly believe it's because it's a very different beast in how it's built and how it works, etc. But that's perhaps a conversation for depending on how deep down this rabbit hole we go. Fundamentally, I think everyone, when they encounter Bitcoin, or any cryptocurrency, has a very similar experience. It's a bit of a wow moment, and then you discover all of the flaws. So in Bitcoin, number one, first and foremost, is, damn, this is slow, right? Even if I'm paying like a lot of money to get this transaction to the top of the queue, and I've managed to understand that about how blockchains work, this is still a 10-minute wait to figure out that my transaction has happened. Lightning solves that problem, and it solves it in the way that it solves it like in the same approach to many other layer 2 scaling solutions across many other chains, which is it's a form of transaction batching, but critically it isn't a blockchain. So the Lightning Network is not another blockchain on top of Bitcoin. It is something different, and it revolves around this concept called payment channels, which I think you touched on in your introduction. You can think of Lightning as being like a giant swimming pool full of liquid Bitcoin, i.e. hot Bitcoin that can be instantly spent and received. And if you were to look into that pool, if you were to swim underneath it and have a look, you would see it's comprised of thousands and thousands of payment channels between different people. To isolate that down to a simple example for you and I, say, you and I might frequently transact together. Who knows what it might be? Let's say Niko and Ben run a tab with each other for the number of times we've been wrong about which Web3 game is going to be a hit, and we're transferring money back and forth between each other. But we realize, wow, these doing this on the main chain is really expensive, and it's not really a good use of our time. So why don't we just run this tab we've got? Why don't we run it separately? Let's open a channel to one another. You can think of it like having a bar on an abacus, and we tend to spend between each other $100. So we'll size that channel at $100, and then until we're bored and decide to close out this bar tab between each other, we'll just send money back and forth instantly, and we won't report it to the blockchain. We'll just trust each other. That's the fundamental concept of a payment channel. It's like opening a bar tab, if that makes sense. Where the magic comes in with Lightning is that you and I might have a bar tab open to one another, so we can pay each other instantly and cheaply. But your friend, let's call them Peter, might not have a channel open with me. So how do I pay Peter instantly on Lightning? Well, the answer is I can hop through you. And your incentive is you take a tiny fee for the pain of having to take a payment from me and route it through yourself to Peter. That is called the gossip network. And that is how, through the kind of concept of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, the Lightning Network allows you to actually send to anyone on the network. So as long as you're connected to one person who is connected to another person and who is connected to another person, you can follow that chain all the way through for your payment to reach its destination. I'll pause there because I was trying to explain a number of concepts, but is that much clear to you?
Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. I'm curious as to why this has not been necessarily adopted to this point by the mainstream, by game developers in particular. Obviously, this is the topic of our show. In a nutshell, what does the Lightning Network actually offer game developers? So I'm a game dev. I'm deciding which blockchain technologies to integrate. Why would I choose to build on Bitcoin? What does the Lightning Network do? What does it enable me to do as a developer?
I think the way to look at it is Bitcoin is fundamentally a value transfer mechanism, right? It's not going to, and this is a well-known criticism of it, which I view as more of an asset, but that's again a separate conversation. That Bitcoin doesn't do more than payments. It lets you send value from A to B, and thereafter you're done with it, and it's either in your bank account or you've sold it. And when I say bank account, I mean your wallet. But what Lightning allows you to do is have access to an instant global payment network. And I think something that people do not appreciate about Lightning is it's blockchain agnostic. So technically, any chain can run Lightning. The fact that some chains have decided not to is a mystery to me. There was a project on Ethereum called Raiden, which was a form of Lightning network for Ethereum. I think it was abandoned a fair while back. Litecoin does actually run a form of Lightning network. So it's really a very effective means of value transfer. And I would approach it as being the cheapest and most affordable form of sending value online that has ever been created. And when you say, what can games developers do with this? I would take the approach that games revolve around transactions, right? Whether or not the game player or the gamer is aware of that, ultimately, the commercial viability of the product revolves around transactions. It revolves around in-app purchases or ad consumption. Both of those are forms of transaction, in my opinion. One is monetary, the other is not. The other is a form of, you trade your attention. But for the provider of that product, for the video game developer, both are forms of monetization. Those forms of monetization carry costs, right? So when the most well-known sort of baddie in the room is the 30% Apple tax or 30% Google tax you pay on IAP. But there's equally transaction costs associated with any form of payment. It's in the range of 3 to 7% for credit cards. It's in the range of, you're losing money on ad networks through take rates at various levels of the stack. On Lightning, you can process payments as small as 1/1000th of a cent. So this is very small amounts of money. You can send those economically. And when you can do that, you can actually do a lot more in the form of rewarded engagement for your players. This means you can take the cost of an in-app purchase down to sub 1 cent if you want to. And there's a lot of evidence in the video games market that the lower the price point on the first IAP in a free-to-play game, the higher the conversion, and therefore the higher the ultimate LTV of the player. But equally, you can do, and this is what we're really seeing happen in the market, you can do a lot more rewarded experiences where the unit economics actually work. So if I'm, let's say I'm a casual games developer and I have bought into this Web3 thing. I've decided I've got to do it. My shareholders are all on board. I need to enter this market. How I have an ARPDAO across my portfolio of casual games of like 15 to 20 cents, and my players are distributed across multiple territories. It's tough for me to crack an LTV higher than $1 to $1.50. How can I possibly send out something of value when the transaction fee on the network could be like 20, 30 cents? And then I've destroyed my ARPDAO for the day. Like my unit economics don't work. Well, when you use Lightning, you can pay out rewards, as I said, that are a fraction of a cent. And all of a sudden, the economics adds up. You can send a player a few hundred Satoshis, a Satoshi being the smallest unit of Bitcoin. It's 1/100 millionth of a Bitcoin. So you can think of it like Bitcoin pennies. You can send a user 100 Satoshis. That's probably about 1 cent or 2 cents. And their engagement goes through the roof because they're playing a free game that just shared a portion of its revenue with me just for the sake of playing it. I've now got something of monetary value out of the game. And that the unit that I received is liquid worldwide with multiple off ramps. so I can then go and spend it immediately. I think that's something else that isn't appreciated about the Bitcoin and Lightning networks, and that is that there is an exchange in pretty much every country with decent liquidity. So if you give a unit of Bitcoin to someone in Indonesia and they don't have any interest in hodling, as we saw in Axie Infinity, for example, they just want to sell it to buy goods for their life, Bitcoin can sustain that sale pressure because it's liquid enough, right? So a million people selling individually 25, 30 cents of Bitcoin a day doesn't move the price of Bitcoin. And that is a very powerful form of rewarded engagement for a game developer. And you ultimately increase your retention, which drives up your LTV and improves the unit economic performance of your game. I think that's the best answer I can try to give to explain how and why you might use this.
Oh, that was a fantastic answer. And it actually leads nicely into my next kind of line of questioning, a couple of questions here. You mentioned Axie Infinity there, which is great because obviously that's the biggest example of rewarded gameplay, i.e., play to earn, up until this point. And obviously we saw and we've seen with just about every play to earn game, if you can call them games, that they're not sustainable. And what you alluded to here is, hey, you actually could create a sustainable experience because you can't move the price of Bitcoin unless you're absolutely talking about massive numbers, massive whales, which of course, those players, those people, individuals don't need to be rewarded, right? Through gameplay. So you're saying there's this world where you could actually create a gameplay experience where if you are choosing to reward your players, it would be sustainable from a kind of a macroeconomic perspective. Now, obviously, it's going to cost the developer. It's a lot cheaper to create your own token out of thin air and reward people with infinite supply. Whereas, to your point, Bitcoin has monetary value, which means me as a developer, I have to eat the cost of doing that. So, where am I going with this line of questioning? Where I'm going with this is, even though using Bitcoin to reward your players, you could do it and not have it be unsustainable from a macroeconomic perspective. However, it becomes less sustainable for you as a developer. I know you just alluded to this because you were talking about ARP DAOs and you have ways of monetizing your players through other means. But how do you see rewarding players through Bitcoin as a game developer where I have to eat that cost? How do you see that being sustainable? And are there some good examples out there that you can point to where developers are doing that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's the way I have always approached it is it's actually a question of margin, right? What you're doing is you're taking either a percentage of a steady income stream, call it ad revenue, or you're taking an estimate of your player LTV, which every game developer does, and you're sharing that back to the player. So clearly you're never going to share 100% back to the player, or you have something unsustainable. That's just, we don't need to go there.
Yep.
But so the question becomes what percentage, right? What gives you the biggest bang for your buck, i.e. what level of payout or revenue share to the player drives the optimum level of re-engagement or enhanced retention or, maximized monetization, whatever your North Star is. And this is very similar actually to how many game developers approach offer wall products when they're thinking about inflation of the soft currencies in their game. And that's how we encourage developers to think. What you're really doing is like a supercharged rewarded engagement platform. And we're pretty happy sharing that most developers that we've come across are sharing in the range of 10 to 20%. And it's driving more than 5x uplift in monetization and engagement. But I think to keep it on a sort of path of thinking about how Lightning enables a lot of this, I wouldn't want us to think it's only about rewarding players. What you actually have in your hands with Lightning is a full peer-to-peer payment network, right? So money can also come into the game, and trade between players can also happen within a game environment. You have a fully liquid token. I should also say that for what it's worth, I think the very same argument holds true for stable coins. So I'm not saying this is like a Bitcoin thing. I think this is true for video games, but I do notice that when you look at video game economics, most of the stable coins sit on crypto rails where the transaction fees are too high for the unit economics. So, if I'm using USDC on Polygon, I'm looking at like a 10 cent or 5 cent transaction fee. But when you're talking about like LTV of a gamer in Brazil, that's actually like a really huge chunk of the player LTV, like a massive chunk. So that's not economical. And that's where Lightning really shines. I think that would be the critical thing I'd want to convey, is that you're talking about transaction costs that they're so low, you can afford to stream money in real time. You can send payments per second of like microscopic amounts of value. Consider things like, and we have seen examples of this in the real world. So I'm not talking hypothetically. You could have a racing game like F-Zero, where when you drive into that area that recharges your car's health, you could actually be streamed money as you're in that area. So you could be paid for the 5 seconds that you're driving through that refuel zone. You could then decide that you want to spend that money knocking another player off of the racetrack. And all these payments are real open network payments. It's not smoke and mirrors. You're actually utilizing the Lightning Network. It is sufficiently performant to do that, which is where I get very excited. Like this to me is a window into the future of how we will spend money online, how we will interact with money online.
Yeah, I mean, I buy that vision. I think it is really quite interesting and exciting. And I have to say, I mean, much to my discredit here, I didn't know much about the Lightning Network or what was possible using Bitcoin as a game developer until you and I chatted a couple of weeks ago and decided to do this episode. And I've been kind of researching it ever since. But I still have this niggling question where it sounds very exciting. It sounds extremely sustainable, for lack of a better phrase, as long as you have a game that monetizes at some level, right? Like it needs to monetize at some level, at which point you can kind of facilitate these very, very cheap transactions back and forth, create a peer-to-peer economy, and have these things have real value in the real world, which, I mean, that's kind of the holy grail for a game developer. And I'm still niggling myself here. Why have so few games been built on Bitcoin so far? Why is it still such a niche area, at least to my knowledge? There haven't been any big efforts by big developers to try and do something on Bitcoin. And I'm just curious as to why, from your perch in the ecosystem, why do you think that is? And are you seeing more adoption? Because again, the conversation is still all about Ethereum, or it's about these new layer ones, or it's about NFTs and trading those on OpenSea or Magic Eden or whatever. And that's where all the mind share is right now. That's where all the conversation is, where the buzz was, where all the venture dollars went over the last 2 or 3 years. And there just hasn't really been much of a light shone on Bitcoin, despite the fact that it sounds like it's actually arguably much more sustainable to build there. If you're trying to do something that sustains over time, as opposed to creating your own token and Ponziing that to the moon, which worked for a while, but obviously doesn't work for forever.
I think there's a number of factors underpinning this. Some, I think if you're someone working in the Lightning ecosystem, it pays to be self-critical at times, and others I think are unrelated to Lightning. So to give some facts or some sort of observation on what does the Bitcoin gaming Lightning ecosystem look like today, it is heavily skewed towards casual and hyper casual. I increasingly think now this is no coincidence. I think it's because it solves that unit economic problem. Like I think if you ignore the fact that you're using Bitcoin for a second, if you put yourself in a game developer's shoes, and I'm talking about game developers beyond Zebedee's customer base in this instance. We've encountered other game developers who have opted to go the Lightning route, and they've never even heard of Zebedee. What they've encountered is that actually this does supercharge retention like enough that they can now start to scale their hyper casual games that previously had no scale. And we're really talking hyper casual here. Things like Flappy Bird, Ball in the Hoop, these type of super, like what Voodoo and Rollick and those guys all go after. that's where you'll find 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 Bitcoin Lightning powered games. Some of them with 1 million, users, 400K dailies, really quite significant user bases, much more significant than you find in the sort of higher profile Web3 IP space. And I think that's a very interesting dichotomy you've got going on, where there's marketed IP that is launched, and I'll come to that in a second. And then there's like this casual sort of mini clip style gaming, which is actually getting really significant user bases. But it's not so much about the crypto piece. Really, what's going on is the developers of the titles are making a calculated business decision and saying, okay, I'll use Bitcoin as a form of reward here. And good, I like that it supercharged my LTV. So great, I'll do that. And I'm not going to advertise this game as a Bitcoin game. I'm not going to make a big noise about it. I'm just going to basically be able to fuel my UA now because my LTV has jumped up. So that's one side of how I would frame things. And I would say that a cursory search on Google Play will prove what I am saying. If you start looking for Bitcoin casual games, you'll encounter a lot. The other side of it does speak to the IP piece. And I think there was a mixture of things that went on there. So one thing is I do believe that collectibles, or the idea of digital goods, really resonates in the gaming world. And until recently, Bitcoin had no answer there. Bitcoin did not do NFTs. There's now a thing called ordinals, which is Bitcoin NFTs. And it's interesting to see companies like Animoca publicly saying like, oh, we'll look at this because this is interesting. Like it solved, someone devised a solution to that product market need, so to speak. It's all open source and blah, blah, blah. But, if I'm speaking commercially, the way I look at that is, now there's an NFT product on the Bitcoin protocol. It's widely used. Magic Eden supports it. More exchanges are adding it. So there is an answer there, but it is very early. I would expect that ecosystem within the Web3 gaming world to demonstrate growth in the next 18 to 24 months. And if anyone, listening on your podcast hasn't taken a look at ordinals, I would encourage them to. They're quite interesting. But the other side of it is actually more, I'm going to sound a little bit cynical, but as someone who was operating commercially in this market during the last sort of big wave of adoption and the sort of crypto mania that followed, there were definitely commercial deals at play where games companies were promised, millions of dollars in a token if they adopted the token and pushed the token to the market. And that's artificially propping up a market. That's not a real market.
Yeah. I think it's kind of interesting that, Bitcoin is what started it all. And now there's this, there was this wave of mania, tulip mania, with all these different chains and layer 2s and new layer 1s, and they were all going to solve the gaming problem. And to your point, there was a lot of money changing hands, right? A lot of VC money coming in, and Bitcoin just kind of chugged along, non-commercial, non-sponsored, had all the problems that we know it has and still does have, I think.
Yeah.
But it's almost kind of coming full circle. In some ways, based on what you're saying here, where, Bitcoin actually is going to be around. It's not going anywhere. Nobody can take it away from the world. It's just going to keep chugging along as long as there are people who want to do transactions and exchange value digitally. Bitcoin will be around, essentially. There's no guarantee it's going to be around for 100 years or even a decade, but it's going to be around for a lot longer than I think some of these other chains and these other products that have propped up this kind of VC money fueled ecosystem. More of an observation, I think, than a question there.
Yeah, no, you're definitely singing from my songbook there. Like I don't. There's a faction of Bitcoin culture or Bitcoin fandom which is very judgmental and looks down on this stuff. I do not take that view. I view it more like money is boring when it works. And that's why Bitcoin seems boring at times, right? Like it doesn't break.
Spot on. Yeah, that's my observation as well. Especially the more I'm listening to you to speak about this, Bitcoin is incredibly boring. It does what it's intended to do, which is transfer of value digitally, peer to peer, in a completely decentralized way. It does it really well. I want to say really well. It does it well.
It hasn't broken yet. That's how I view it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Let's put it that way. It hasn't broken yet. Has its problems, but it does that piece really well without any bells and whistles. When something is boring, it doesn't.
It's like dollars are boring. Yeah, like people don't. I mean, everyone loves accumulating dollars. Like let's be upfront here. But dollars themselves are boring. Like games don't come out going like, and I featured dollars in my game. Right. Like that, no one cares, right? Because it's just sort of okay, great. There's payments involved, and I do take the view that Bitcoin's very similar in that sense. Like it's hard to market in and of itself the fact that you're using a global currency, but if you give your users a global currency that they can sell anywhere, your addressable market grows. The ability to reach those customers is very easy because you're using a payment rail that is inherently global. It's born on the internet. It's of the internet. And if you use it in ways that it can handle right now, such as microtransactions in games on Lightning, it performs very well. If you try and push it to do things that the developers or contributors to Bitcoin haven't got to yet, or something that is contentious, you're going to hit a brick wall. Like there's no point pretending otherwise. And I think that's where other chains come in. I can definitely see a future where I may go to a service or product or service that is built on another chain, and I will spend Bitcoin to access that service, and I'll receive some sort of token or access coin or NFT or whatever to use that service. And then when I leave, I might get some Bitcoin back and go on my way, or I might take USDC. Like who knows? But I see Bitcoin as sitting very much in the money and payments aspect of things, and it doesn't really play in the sort of smart contract programmability space, and that's okay. Like I think it's a false argument to sort of go down that path.
Yeah. So different product, different solution. Not trying to do lots of the bells and whistles, not trying to we're building on Solana, and Solana pitched itself to us when we first made the choice to build there as, hey, it's great for gaming. It's super, fast, it's scalable, et cetera. And Bitcoin really isn't trying to do that or try to make any claims. In fact, it makes no claims whatsoever. Let's talk a little bit about, so we've talked a lot about Bitcoin, Lightning Network, what the gaming ecosystem currently looks like on Bitcoin. I'm learning a ton here. So thank you, Ben. Hopefully our audience is learning a ton here too. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about Zebedee, and what you do. Why have you chosen gaming specifically as a use case? You could focus on other use cases, I'm presuming, but you've very squarely chosen gaming as that use case. That's what you put in most of your marketing materials. And we'll talk a little bit about your investors in a second as well. What do you do and how do you do it?
Yeah, so I think something I didn't mention when describing Lightning, and I think actually anyone in the crypto space who's following Lightning will call me out on this. Lightning's actually pretty difficult to run yourself. That's you need to not just be Bitcoin technical, as in you need to understand certain Bitcoin terms like UTXOs, but equally you need to know how to manage liquidity. So while I gave that bar tab analogy of you and I open a bar tab together and we can transact instantly with each other, what actually goes on down on the base chain layer is that we open a smart contract with each other, what's called a 2 of 2 multisig, a multi-signature transaction. And then that's sort of written into the Lightning protocol. The Lightning protocol interprets that. We have a channel. It gets technical. And my point, the reason I say that is what Zebedee does is it abstracts that away into a single API. So Zebedee at its core, what the actual name of the company stands for is Zebedee empowers Bitcoin-enabled digital economy engines. And that is what the base of our system is. We are a licensed and regulated Lightning API that anyone can use. And you can think of it as it allows you to stick Bitcoin payments into your game or application. Like whatever if you want it to speak Bitcoin, the fastest and easiest way to do it is by using Zebedee. That's the sort of pitch. To then sort of move away from being too much of a walking advert, the reason we targeted the games industry, or the reason we opened with the games industry, is not least of which because two of the three co-founders, it was co-founded by Andre, who's the CTO, Simon, our CEO, and Chris, who's our head of R&D. Two or three of them, Chris and Simon, are gamers. Chris in particular, he's known as Mandelduck online, made the first Bitcoin games in around 2011 or so. And if you go back and look at screenshots of those games, you'll be really depressed at how much Bitcoin Chris was paying out to people because it was a lot of money. But back then it wasn't. But yeah, so there's been this awareness of Bitcoin and games work well together in the company's DNA, and then equally a more rational commercial decision of understanding that Lightning shines when it comes to micropayments. The gaming industry is an industry that is built around micropayments, post free to play, and therefore there's probably the strongest product market fit in that environment. We have seen, I'll share with you, a sort of Bitcoiner perspective on the Bitcoin ecosystem. We have seen folks in Lightning try and go after e-commerce, try and go after remittances, try like all sorts of Bitcoin use cases, right? Digital global money. Arguably, just because Lightning is here, that hasn't solved the problem, because if you try and send more than sort of $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 worth of Bitcoin over Lightning today, there's a high chance that your payment will hang or get stuck because there isn't enough liquidity in Lightning yet to process a transaction that large. But if you're down sub $1,000 or you're at the $1,000 mark, and maybe these days a bit above that, you're going to have no problems whatsoever. So we were thinking, okay, where are these spaces where you have very frequent sub $1,000 transactions? And that's where gaming came up. And that's sort of what underpinned it. We also spent a long time at the very beginning of the company evaluating whether or not this shouldn't be done with stable coins. And that's where we sort of had this deep dive on transaction fees on stablecoin networks and what would go on there. And that's where we concluded Lightning would probably work best. So long-winded answer to say gaming's in the DNA, and we also assessed the gaming market and thought this looks like it works for Lightning.
One of your CEO founder, Simon, you mentioned, his name is actually Simon Cowell. I discovered,
it is, yeah.
which I found entertaining. It wasn't the Simon Cowell, I don't think, but nonetheless, fun side fact there. I'm sure
he tells me it really helps for restaurant reservations. Apparently,
I bet it does. Probably very annoying in other parts of his life, though, I would imagine. So one of your taglines is "Where fun meets Bitcoin," which I really like. But one of the things you've been talking about here is you're not even emphasizing Bitcoin necessarily. You're just, emphasizing peer-to-peer, micropayments essentially. Web3 games in general have very much de-emphasized. It's not very fashionable at the moment for a Web3 game developer to emphasize the fact that they're on Ethereum or on Solana or they have NFTs or whatever. It's digital collectibles, and we don't talk about tokenized economies. We just talk about economies, game economies. You've chosen, at least in this tagline, to emphasize the fact that hey, it's Bitcoin. It really it's crypto, right? If anything screams crypto, Bitcoin screams crypto. So I'm curious to hear why you've chosen that positioning. Is it helpful?
I think you're the first person who's asked me that in gaming. It's interesting. So we actually spend quite a lot of time doing user research, both on our own users and on what I would call like market sentiment. It's a very wishy-washy way of putting it, but we try and figure out what people are thinking about crypto at any given point in time. Because obviously in bull runs, all bets are off and everyone's racing for everything. And in bear markets, people might, throw a plate at you across the dinner table if you bring up crypto again. So it really sort of depends, But I would say there's a few sides to this. One is the Bitcoin community itself has historically been and is, continues to be a very quite a serious bunch of people when you're talking about, and forgive me for getting a bit Bitcoiny here, but when you're talking about building like a full decentralized money to replace the dollar, it attracts a lot of folks who, that is the mission, right? We're going to build decentralized money for the internet, and I don't care about the use case, the special need, whatever. Like the mission is to build internet money that the state does not control. When you're in an industry like gaming and entertainment, I don't really think a 16-year-old who's playing Fortnite needs to be hit with like Austrian economic lecture on how central planning for financial systems doesn't necessarily breed a healthy financial, blah, blah, blah. So maybe that's not like the way to go here when you're trying to speak to a teenager. That's one angle. So we do deliberately say, Bitcoin can be fun too. You don't necessarily have to hodl it. It's fun to send it around. It's fun. There's a new thing that the Bitcoin community is raging about right now called Nostr. It's like a social networking layer on top of Bitcoin. We'd have to do a whole, I don't have time to go into it. We'd have to do a whole nother session on it. But that in that model, a like is called a zap, and a zap is a payment. And so instead of liking content, you send micropayments. And I get very excited about this because to me, this is breaking the mentality of hodl till you die. It's much more like, hey, you got a bit of Bitcoin, just like send it to a friend. Who cares? They made a nice cat meme. It's all shits and giggles. Pardon my French, but like that's sort of how I sort of see that. So that's one reason we do lean into that. The other is that I will share that in the bull market, we were actually playing down the crypto side of things. We noticed in talking to game developers that they were very allergic to a crypto pitch, given how much they were being inundated with crypto pitching. So we focused on peer-to-peer value transfer, money in games, etc. And that worked for us. It did help in terms of making people aware of what Lightning is good for and what it is not good for, and why the fact that it is Bitcoin might not be a big deal. Now that we're in, a bear market, we notice that Bitcoin is the trusted crypto in terms of it's the one you can say, hey, we're Bitcoin, and people go, okay, at least you're that one, right? Like I get that one. The orange coin I recognize. This other one I'd never seen before. So we lean into it more now because we can tell that our users say, okay, good. You're not sending me a bag of snails. You're actually giving me some money here. And the other side of it is we do not, like I said, we don't encourage our users to hold necessarily. We don't tell them to go buy a USB stick and keep it under their bed. We say, you just got 10 cents from a game. If you play it for a few more days, you might have $1. If you get $5, you've got enough to top up your phone for the week. And our system lets you do that, right? We've linked up with merchants and so on to let people cash out quickly into things that actually have tangible value. And I think in general, that is a key, again, to pull it away from Zebedee. I think it is a key thing Lightning and any crypto network needs to demonstrate is real world utility. And that gets thrown around like, if someone buys a pizza or something, it's real world utility. But you need it consistently. You need it all the time, and that is like the default user behavior. And then you've demonstrated utility. And to me, that's what's exciting about Lightning is that you can send Bitcoin from the US to the UK. You're in the US, aren't you? So let's say let's say you were using Cash App in the US. You could load up your Cash App with $10 of Bitcoin. You could send me those $10 of Bitcoin instantaneously, asking no one's permission on the internet. I receive them here in the UK, and I can cash them out instantly to pounds through like Coin Corner, a UK exchange I use, or any other. And the total fee we will pay in that whole thing is less than a foreign exchange fee. So you start to see like, oh, wow, you have instant money transfer. You can swap it out on either end because it's liquid enough, and it speaks internet. So you can stick it into games and applications. And now you have a full global linked up economy using an internet currency as the conduit. And that, to me, I just can't get away from that. It's super, super powerful. That's revolutionary technology.
Yeah, I mean, and that's arguably going right back to the original vision for Bitcoin. I kind of joked in the intro. I said, Satoshi probably didn't imagine micropayments in games as as one of the use cases, but arguably, the more you speak, it's quite compelling to me that actually that very much could be one of the original use cases envisioned by Satoshi for Bitcoin. Not in its purest form, but
don't quote me on this.
Okay.
I think in the original, I'd have to do some Googling. I think in the original Bitcoin client that Satoshi released, there was a Bitcoin poker game. I think that was in there. I think one of the first things that was built into Bitcoin Core was a little game, and I think it was poker. You just reminded me of that. I hadn't thought of that in a long, long time. I'd have to I'd have to fact check that.
All right. Well, let's both fact check that, because that would be quite fascinating, actually. Okay, so you raised a bunch of money at Zebedee to do build out this vision, very compelling. And one of the investors that you've got in the mix, which is the one that caught my eye the most, is Square Enix, Japanese gaming giant, of course, famous for Final Fantasy mostly, but a bunch of other games as well. They've been one of the most bullish on Web3. Since the very beginning, although they just lost their longtime CEO who was pushing a lot of that vision. They're an investor in Zebedee, and I'm very curious to hear. I think you do have some collaborations with them, but I'm definitely curious to hear. They are one of the largest, if not the largest, large developer that most people have heard of that are really pushing the boundaries on Web3 and continue to do so even through the crypto winter that we're in. What are you doing with them? Why did they invest? What are they working on that is interesting?
That would be interesting to our
that you can share with our listeners.
I will say they're a terrific, and I don't say this in some sort of cheesy way. They've actually turned out to be a terrific shareholder to work with and communicate with. They're very open and transparent, and they're very collaborative. So the first thing we did actually was we did put our technology in one of their games. It was a game called Ludo Zenith. I honestly believe what they wanted to do was put our hypothesis to the test with one of their own products, and we drove a roughly 80% increase in ARPDAU for that title. So they were happy with that, and that title's still going on. The deeper discussions we have with them, I'm not going to be able to share anything about. But what I will share, and I think I can share, is they're not what I don't think they're what folks would instinctively reach for. We don't talk to larger AAA game developers about sticking Bitcoin in Final Fantasy. Like that's that's not the conversations we have with them. The conversations are much more centered around the fact that we run payments infrastructure. That's like I can't really go much further than that, because it's not in any kind of material place where it makes sense to disclose things, but also this is a very early market, and I think there's a lot of moving pieces. But yeah, really, I would focus on the fact that Zebedee is at its core global regulated microtransactional payment infrastructure, and that's powerful in and of itself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, we'll just have to watch this space. Definitely curious to see what Square Enix does. Yes, I take your point that
I wish I could announce. Yeah, I wish I could announce like Bitcoin Monster Hunter or something, but that's not what we're into. That's not what we talk about. Yeah.
No, fair enough. Okay, so we're kind of heading towards the end of our hour here together. You've convinced me that Bitcoin and the Lightning Network are definitely relevant for game developers. It may be a certain segment of the gaming market for now, and it may not be for every developer, certainly. But I can definitely see the arguments for adopting something like Light Network. You said it really well at the start. It's kind of like, imagine an offer wall, right? I mean, so familiar with offer walls. I used to make social casino games, slots games back my last company, and we monetized the early titles entirely through ads. We had very low IAP conversion rates initially until we had a hit product. But so initially we monetized through ads and all the ad networks and had them competing against each other and had their offer walls in there. And so I'm very, very familiar with that. And I totally see how Bitcoin would just be a phenomenal solution, especially if you can do it at those kind of very, very low transaction costs and for very small amounts, and not give away your entire LTV to the players. So 100% see that as a great use case. But I'm curious to kind of end our show here is, what do you think needs to happen for Bitcoin to be perhaps taken more, air quotes, seriously by the developer community? I don't think I'm the only one I'm not skeptical about integrating Bitcoin into games. And I see the arguments that you're making, but I know I'm not unique in having that feeling like Bitcoin is just so hard. It's like the Bitcoin maxis are really maxis about Bitcoin for that, global digital currency use case, not really for anything else. And I'm just very curious to hear your thought. And it's been around for the longest as well. And those maxis haven't really changed their mind over the years. And so I'm just very curious to hear your thoughts on what needs to happen, in your opinion, for there to be more adoption of Bitcoin, Lightning Network, or otherwise, other solutions, in gaming, but more broadly as well.
It's something we obviously ask ourselves quite a lot. I would share that we've got other shareholders from the games industry as well. Most notably, Hilmar, the CEO of CCP, is an investor in us, and we speak to these folks pretty frequently, monthly, bi-monthly, whatever it might be, and we do trade sort of ideas, high-level knowledge, high-level awareness. And I think it comes back to a very recurring theme, which is, and it's on. This is on Zebedee to deliver this, and not so much on Lightning, I think, when it comes to gaming. But that is that there needs to be more. I think larger game developers, owners of significant IP, etc., need to see more real-world use cases of the technology in more scaled environments. So we recently collaborated with some folks who modded Minecraft, and now you go into Minecraft and you joke mine Bitcoin, right? So you're not actually mining it, you're fake mining it, but you have to go and dig emeralds out of the ground in Minecraft, and then that lets you buy ASICs in the game to mine Bitcoin. But the game is actually paying you Bitcoin. It's real Bitcoin that you start earning once you start mining. The retention on that product is fantastic, and we're starting to share that data with partners. We also have some more significant PC-based IP coming, which I think will really demonstrate to the esports ecosystem that there is a business model here that is beyond just advertising. You can actually monetize prize pools and transactions real time in games when you have PvP competitive play, because one of the first things that we did, and it was one of the first things in Lightning Gaming, was we infused Counter-Strike with Bitcoin. So when I shot you, you dropped a coin in the game, like an actual 3D coin. And when I grabbed that coin in the game, it was sent to my wallet in real time. We're bringing that back in with a more significant piece of IP. And my hope is that folks will see that and realize, okay, so it's not just mobile casual and rewards. It's also competitive play, PvP. It's also circular economies when you have simulated trade. It really is an economy engine, right? This is something where you can insert money into your game. And I mean insert money in the circular sense. So when we had coin-op games and you got playtime, now it's actually, you insert your 25 cents. There's 25 cents in the game now. Where do you want to allocate it? How do you want to spend it? And games are multiplayer. So that could mean that you give it to another player in exchange for goods or services. So I think, the holy grail many folks want, and this includes, this isn't just Lightning, is, like a massive MMORPG that runs a giant simulated economy with like a real value base. It would just be incredible, right? It would be such a fascinating thing to watch and study and see all the ups and downs of. And I do think we'll get there, regardless of whether it's Bitcoin and another crypto or anything. I think that's going to come to market, but it might take a decade. In the short term, I think if I were a game developer right now, I would be paying a lot of attention to the complaints Tim Sweeney and the Epic crowd put out in public around payment processing fees and the margin erosion there, because they're not alone. And I know this is a well-trodden debate in the games industry, but that piece of payment processing is actually quite critical margin for games developers, and it can mean the difference between a successful product and an unsuccessful product. And then it also equally, if you're scaled, if you're like a Supercell or otherwise, it can mean the difference in sort of 15-20% of your EBITDA margin, right? It's like a big old chunk of cash that you're leaving on the table. And Lightning takes that right down, right? It takes it right down to like 1% or so. And it is, from a regulatory point of view, from a market awareness point of view, Bitcoin might be crypto. I'm not shying away from that, but it is definitely the one that if you go to a US regulator, they're like, yeah, that's fine. Please pass on through. If you go to the European regulator, they say, yes, that's fine. Go to the exchange and sell it, because it's old, as you say. Like it's been around. People get it. The orange logo, cool. That one's kosher. It's not something new. And in that sense, it's an easy way to dip your toes into this world, understand the benefits that crypto assets bring to digital environments. And from there, the world's your oyster. You can choose whatever path you want. But at least now you're processing value. And that wasn't possible before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that argument about margins and LTVs, like it's such a finely tuned machine these days, acquiring users and like the formulas and the spreadsheets that run those calculations are massive, and leaving even a point, or never mind, 15 or 20 points, basis points on the table is madness, right? And can mean the difference between a successful studio and one that has to shutter their doors because they just can't spend profitably.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have to say that very, very compelling conversation. I did some research for this episode, but I have learned so much more from you about how this all works, and have found it absolutely fascinating to rethink about Bitcoin for the first time in many years. Like, I'm a hodler. I've been a Bitcoin hodler since, I first got into crypto, probably 2015, 2016 timeframe. So not super early, but early enough. And I've done nothing but hodl my Bitcoin. And I just really haven't thought about it in all the years since. And this is why it was so fascinating to have you come on to kind of reinvigorate the brain cells a little bit and kind of question the assumptions that we've been making about Bitcoin and what it's used for and what is it good for and what can it do and what can it do. And I love the fact that you guys are questioning those assumptions, and hopefully our listeners will have found this as fascinating as I have. So Ben, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for the very kind words just then. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we like to try and make our guests feel good. And you're starting your weekend. We're recording this on a Friday, and it's evening in the UK. So hopefully you can enter the weekend in a positive mood and a good vibe.
I'll do my best.
Excellent. And of course, as always, we like to give a big thank you to all of our listeners. We'll be back next week with more interviews, more insights, and more analysis from the weird and wonderful world of Web3. So until next time, friends, stay crypto curious and feel free to send me questions, guest recommendations, and comments. My email is niko@naavik.co, and you can find me on Twitter, or as it's now called, X, @NikoTheFin. DMs are open.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.